Okay, so let's do a little bit with using terminology with decimal points. And then we'll go into rounding of those numbers. So here is a number, and this number is 1,248 and 653 thousandths is what this number is. But let's first talk about some terminology with these numbers. So let's start with the numbers to the left of the decimal point. You might be more familiar with this terminology. This number right here is in the thousands place. And you can think about dollars. If you have $1,000, it's going to be 1000, so that'd be thousands. The next number here is in the hundreds. The next number is in the tens place, and the 8 here is in the ones place. And those you might be familiar with that. If you have $10, it's got 2 digits to the left of the decimal point. And the tens, that 1 of $10 is in the tens place. If you have $100, notice the decimal point would be right here. And notice your 3 spots over is where the 1 is located, and so forth. So these terminologies here tell you what position of the number you're talking about. Are you talking about the ones digit? Are you talking about the hundreds digit? Are you talking about the thousands digit? So if I asked you what number is in the tens digit or in the tens position, you would say 4. Because if you look at the tens spot, you see the 4 sitting there. What number is in the ones spot? And you would say it's the 8 number that's sitting in there. Okay, what are the terminology to the numbers to the right of the decimal point? Well, it turns out it uses very much the same terminology as we just wrote. Now, when you go to the right of the decimal point, there is no one spot at all. Whoops, I'm sorry about that. There is no. Sorry, that was a 6, and there is no one spot. So this spot right here is called, it looks like tens, but it's actually got, instead of ending 10 with an S on the end, it's 10 with the THS on it. And so this is the tenths spot, we call that. I always find them a little difficult to say verbally, to put that on there, because there's THS, and that's not always easy to say. Notice next to the tenth spot is the hundredths spot. It's got that THS on it, but it looks just like hundred, but with the THS. And then the last spot, and sorry I'm drawing a line through all my words, is guess what it's going to be. Thousandths spot. And so when you're looking at numbers to the right of the decimal point, the places are about the same as they are to the left, except they have the THS on the end of them. So when you're looking at words describing numbers, if it has the THS on it, you know that you're talking about numbers to the right, and you just got to count over. Also remember, when you count to the right, there's no one spot. And so here, if we do that counting, I change my color. This is the tenth spot, hundredths, thousandths spots. We're going the other direction from the decimal point: ones, tens, hundreds, thousands. And that can continue on. The next digit over will be the 10,000ths, the 10,000s. Then the next digit over will be the 100,000s, then the millions, and so forth. Same going to the right of the decimal point after thousandths. It's 10,000ths, 100,000ths, millionths, and so forth. Okay, but I'll stop at this point, at least in terms of how far I'm going to go in terms of writing all that information. So now let's talk about writing and saying numbers. So this one, what you usually do is you say this number to the left, then you put the word "and" in for the decimal point, and then you say the number to the right. Okay? So let's give this a try. That's just the basic way we're going to say it. But when you're going to put the decimal point into the number, you just use the word "and." So, and not to say there's not more than one "and" in a number, but that's what you would put there. So for instance, this would be 600. If I was to write this number in English, 628. Okay, that takes care of the first part of the number. Now I'm putting the "and" in. That's for my decimal point. I'll put a little decimal point below that "and." And then what's the next number? The next, I'm going to write down the next line here, but this is the same number. And 9. And then what position is the 9 in? It's in the, oops, I misspelled that. Let me erase that. It's in the 10th spot. So I write that in to tell you what spot is it located in. So 9/10 would be that number. Okay, so I've put a number down here in red. Why don't you go ahead and write that number out and pause the video, write that number out, and then replay the video, and I will write that number as well. So again, when writing these numbers, I go ahead and start with the number to the left of the decimal point. And this is 1. So this is the first one's in the thousands place. So this is the number 1. What position is it in? It's in the thousands place. So 1,000. I don't need the S on there. The next digit is a 4. So 1,400. And 20. And that's for my decimal point. Now what's the number to the left? It's an 84. And then what position is the last digit in? The 4. That is in the hundredths. Okay, so when you say the numbers to the right of the decimal point, you just say the number and then you put the position of the last digit of that number. So in our first example, we had a 9. It was only one digit, so the last digit was in the 10th spot. Okay. I'll do one more example of this. Go ahead and write this number out in English. Pause the video as you're doing so. Then when you're done, come back and I'll go through it. So for this one, again, I start with the numbers to the left of the decimal point. And I just see the number 1. So it's 1. Now I have the decimal point, so I need the word "and." So again, I'll put a dot below it just so you recognize that's for the decimal point. And then everything after the "and" is going to be the number after it. So I just look at the number and I just write that number as it is. So this would be 500 72. And then where is that 2 located? Let's see, this spot, we'll go through the spots real quick. This spot is the tenths, hundredths. So the 2 is in the thousandths position. So that's what I put at the end, 572. I'm just going to write down the next line here. Thousandths. So this whole part is after the decimal point, 572 thousandths. Notice I didn't put 500ths 72. You don't have to do that. You just write the number as it is, as though it's a whole number, and then you just add on the very last word is the position of the last digit in the number, so you know where it's located. So let's get into rounding. So this number right here is 2,431. And let's say they want us to round it to the hundreds position. What are they asking us to do? So a lot of times they'll say this, round to the nearest hundred. Okay? And so what you're taking from this question is they want us to go to the nearest hundred. And so you need to find the hundred spot in your number. That's the first thing you need to do. Now be careful, hundred versus hundredths. Those are different, right? We've learned that. So the nearest, but we're not doing hundreds in this one, we're doing 100. So on this number, where's the 100 spot? And I see the 100 spot is right here. What that means is you're going to round to that digit. So to round to that digit, you got to look at the digit to the right of it. So we got to look at the one right next to it to the right. So the next lower number. That's going to dictate to us what we do to our number. Okay? If that number to the right, the one I have an arrow to, is less than 5, so if it's a 4, a 3, a 2, a 1, or a 0 digit, if it's one of those, if it's less than 5, you keep the hundreds digit the same. You don't change it. If the number is 5, 6, 7, 8, or 9, if it's greater than 5, then you increase the hundred spot by, in this case, by 1. So it would become a 5. After that, all the numbers to the right become zeros and you've rounded it. So in this case, I know it sounds complicated. I think it's harder in words than just by me showing. So let's go through and show it. So I take this number, I'm going to rewrite it, 2,431. What I would do is find out what you have to round it to, in this case the 100 spot. That's right here. And then I see a 3 sitting next to it. Because it's less than 5, I don't change anything about the 100 spot. I'll leave the 4 as it is. And this number then becomes, when I round it, 2. That doesn't change because that's way over here. The 4 didn't change because I decided by the rules of rounding it doesn't need to change. And then after that, I just put zeros in the place of the other digits that are present. Now I've rounded it. What rounding is just a way for us to kind of go, well, there's about, or we just want to round, we want a more estimated number. We don't need an exact number here. We're going to round that number. You know, if you go to a party, how many people were there? Well, you give the exact number, or you could just round it to the nearest reasonable number for it. Oh, there was 20 people at the party. Well, there could have been 19, there could have been 21. You just rounded it, and by the way the person said it to you, you knew there was about 20. They rounded it. So let's do this for more practice. So here would be a question you might get. There's a number that's given to you, and it says round to the nearest tenths place. So what do? Again, the first thing is, we're smart. We see that it says tenths place, and it has the THS on it. So it's not referring to the 2 that's in the tens place. It's referring to the 3. Okay, so we're going to round to the nearest tenths place. So what we do is we look at the number to the right of that digit. So the rules are the same whether you're to the right of the decimal point or to the left of the decimal point. The rules don't change. So I'm looking at the 7. I see it's a big number. It's bigger than 5. It's 5 or bigger. And so what I'm going to do is increase my tens place to 4. We're going to increase it by 1. You always just increase it by 1. And then the rest of the number we just start writing. So let's start writing this number. It'd be 428 because we don't mess with anything to the left of the number we're evaluating, or where all the evaluation's taking place. The 3 is now going to become a 4, and everything after the rounded spot, which in this case was the 10th place, becomes zeros. So we just include zeros for the rest of it. So again, we round it up to the 4 because that 7 right here was 5 or greater. So here's one for you to try. Go ahead and pause the video as you're trying this. Then when you're ready, come on back and we'll go through the answer. Okay, so again, when we look at the question, what we're looking for is what place are we trying to round to. In this time, we're trying to round to the tens place. The tens place is right here. It's a 9. And so I look to the number just to the right of the 9. I see it's a 6. So that's going to increase by 1. So this gets a little bit tricky because what happens 9, if we add 1 to it, becomes 10. So to add that 1, this number is going to become a 0 because we're going to add the 1 to it. And because we're adding 1, because 9 became 10, we got to add 1 to that one because it was a 10, not a 9. So the way to think about it is 89, if you add 1 to it, becomes 90, right? Because when we add 1, we can't just drop it to 0. That really lowers the number if we didn't increase the 8 by 1 to 10. So sometimes it's good to you can look at the whole number and add 1 to it. So the other way to look at it, 189 plus 1 would become 190. Right, and that's another way to look at it. So anytime you get to a 9 that goes to a 0, you got to add 1 to the next digit over as well because it's a 10 you're adding on. So in this case, it'd be 190. The 6 becomes a 0 because again we've rounded it, so it's a 0. And then we have the dot 0, 0, 0, 0. Okay. In the answers, a lot of times though, when you look at this on the exam, it might remove all these zeros because remember they don't mean anything. They don't change the number. And so you might see as an answer 1900 in this case might be an answer. And so just be looking for that. It could be 1900. It could be 19.0, 0.000. Remember, because all the zeros to the right of the decimal point can always be removed when they're hanging off by themselves. But remember, if you have this number and it has a bunch of zeros and then there's a 1 out there, you can't remove all those zeros because that 1 is sitting out there. You can't just go removing all those zeros. So only if they're hanging out by themselves after the decimal point. So just be looking for that. It could be written in the answers as this, and it could be written in the answers with all the zeros on the end. Again, those two numbers are the same.